Good afternoon. My name is Delia Valles Rosales. I work for the Texas A&M at Kingsville. I am with the NSF HSI STEM Resource Hub, and I co-host this webinar series along with Dr. Marta Desmond from New Mexico State University. I would like to welcome you to our fourth webinar of the fall semester webinars. And this time we focus the webinar in increasing student success in gateway courses. A little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will have three webinar speakers, and we expect to have approximately 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the webinars, the three presentations for questions and answers. We really appreciate if our attendees ask the questions using the Q&A box. And however, if you have questions or technical questions related to Zoom or other things, please take a look at the chat. So again, we are using the Q&A box for questions related to the webinar. Dr. Desmond and I will be curating the questions at the end of the presentations. And hopefully we have enough time to answer all of your questions. If not, we will be posting the answers in our website. And pretty soon, we will be posting the link to our website in the chat room. And we highly encourage you to become a member of our network. At the end of the webinar, we really need you to answer a survey, and we are going to be posting the link to the survey in the chat room. This survey should not take more than 5 minutes, and as you leave, please respond to that survey. It is important for us to get a feedback as well as to report to the National Science Foundation the results of the webinars. It is a great pleasure to introduce you to our three webinar speakers this afternoon. Dr. Amy WEIMER is a professor of human development and family sciences and the director of the School of Family and Consumer Sciences at Texas State University. As a developmental psychologist by training, she specializes in investigating factors that affect cognitive and academic development in diverse learners. Dr. WEIMER has been a co-PI on several institutional-level grant-funded initiatives to improve outcomes for Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish-English bilingual students and multiple institutions. Our second speaker is Dr. Bill Saner, I'm sorry, Bill.
Okay.
He is an associate professor in the Department of the Mathematics Department at San Diego State University, and he is also the director of the Center for Research and Mathematics in Science Education. Dr. Saner's research focuses on developing classroom learning environments in which students from historically excluded and marginalized communities have greater opportunities to learn mathematics. Dr. Saner is especially focused on developing classrooms in which multilingual students who are bureaucratically classified as English learners can benefit from participating in classroom discussions. Our third speaker is Dr. Mary Pilgrim, and she holds a PhD in mathematics education and a master's degree in mathematics. She's an associate professor of mathematics education in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at San Diego State University, and she's also the director of Math and Statistics Learning Center. Dr. Pilgrim's research area is in undergraduate mathematics education, with efforts focused on implementing active and equity-focused strategies in the classroom. Let's welcome the three speakers this afternoon, and we really appreciate that you took your time to be with us today. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Delia. I wanted to talk to you about some of my research that is focused on enhancing academic outcomes in diverse learners in gateway courses to STEM careers. I'm going to talk largely about Hispanic bilingual students. So that's really this focus of this project. And within this presentation, I hope to talk about, it's not letting me advance my slides here. Let's see. Okay, I'll just do it that way. Okay. I want to just briefly tell you a little bit about the name of the grant that was NSF funded. So you all can see how this was funded. That's really important to acknowledge our funding source. I am the co-PI on building capacity, transforming undergraduate education in STEM through culturally relevant pedagogy and community engagement. And so this grant project just ended this year, which is a great time for me to be here to talk to you about it, because now I can talk to you about some of the results, right? And within this presentation, I'll talk first just a little tiny bit about the underrepresentation of Hispanic bilingual students in STEM, in education and STEM careers. And then because my background is in psychology, I really am focusing on a theoretical framework that involves looking at the holistic learner. So I'll talk just a little bit about the foundational theory of my research and how I look at different pathways toward academic success. Then I'll talk about some examples of putting theory into practice, namely this project, and then I'll end with a summary. So that's where I'm going today. So my training and background is really focused on understanding how children and youth develop. And so my background is really looking at how we can get these young kids to academic success as college graduates. And there's a lot of factors that affect these pathways towards success. Unfortunately, we see some disparities in the field. If you look at even current findings, we still see, even in 2021, disparities in the representation of diverse learners in STEM careers. We see Hispanic and Black workers are underrepresented at the highest rates, but we also see some disparities still for women in math, physical sciences, computer engineering. There's still a large underrepresentation. And so for me, I'm very interested in understanding some of the predictors of that. My background is, my father is Hispanic. His first language was Spanish. And so I was very interested in how he became successful. He has a master's degree in engineering and actually in business, but his undergraduate's in engineering. And I was just so curious about what kinds of factors help people build resilience when they're faced with adversity and when they're faced with things like poverty. And so I became very interested in this as a psychologist. And what I look at are the predictors of positive developmental outcomes, in this project, academic outcomes, and the context in which those developmental outcomes are occurring. I think that's what a lot of people look at, are the predictors of student success. But I think what we need to look at more as a field are the processes. So the interaction among all of the different predictors of academic success in the context in which they're occurring. So the classroom as a context. So how is it that instructors, and how is it that peers and mentors, how is it that all of these support mechanisms interact to predict successful outcomes, and how do we see the resilience of student learners and learn from that so that we can then apply that for people who are still struggling. So I'm really interested in the processes and interactions among predictors and contexts in academic outcomes. So from past research, we do know that there are a number of predictors that can lead us to see academic outcomes. For example, we see that high school GPA or standardized test scores such as ACT or SAT scores are predictive factors. We also see gender, ethnicity, first generation status. So if you're the first person to go to college, it's very difficult sometimes to navigate the college campus, to feel a sense of belonging on that college campus. We also see socioeconomic status as an indicator of success. So obviously, if you have more financial means, then that can be a real asset. And then there's some literature that has also supported that living on campus can be helpful in helping students feel a sense of belonging there. So I come from Texas State University. I'm a professor there, and our freshmen have to live on campus their first year. So the context of educational outcomes is important to look at as a factor. So one of the things that we can look at is how accessible quality education is to different diverse learners. So we look at the literature, we can see that there's still a lot of underrepresentation, discrimination in recruitment. So some studies have looked at, students reaching out to find potential mentors and the likelihood that that mentor will reply to the email, depending on the background of the student that's seeking help. We also know from educational research, of course, that teachers call on students differently depending on their gender, on their ethnic background. So we can see that there's ways students feel less welcomed in certain classroom environments. Sometimes the teachers don't feel connected with the students don't feel connected with the teachers. So at Texas State, we had a recent survey, and many of our students reported that they don't feel their professors relate to them at all. And so that's something that we can change at the faculty level. We've also heard from students that there's a lack of encouragement. So if you look at the research on STEM education, you can see that about 1/3 of students, female students, kind of lose interest in science at the junior high, middle school level, and then again, another third in high school. So by the time they're getting to the college level, undergraduate, four-year college, or even community college, they may be very discouraged and feel that they are not a part of those careers. We also see, because of the underrepresentation, less mentorship, fewer role models. And then we look at factors such as, is the classroom inclusive? Do we really make a point of accommodating and connecting with all learners and assuming that everyone can be successful from the very beginning or not? So those are all factors. Other things that we can look at as educators are the processes underlying different academic outcomes. So one of the things I've been very focused on in my research is looking at students' motivation to pursue STEM degrees. So in this study that I'm about to share some results of, we had a survey where we looked at motivation to do science. And then we also asked them to relate it back to some of their assets, such as being bilinguals in Spanish and English. And what we can tell is that recognizing your own strengths and assets as a learner will help you continue to be motivated to pursue that. If you feel you have something to contribute and you are making a difference, making an impact, even for your family and your community, then you'll be continuing to be motivated to learn and pursue that STEM degree. We also know that sense of belonging is important. Belonging on campus and belonging in STEM and feeling like you can be motivated and successful. Sometimes I've talked with women in science in particular that feel that they have been told they don't belong there, that it's not really for them. And we need to change that. We need to change the social landscape about that. And as educators, we can think about how we send messages to our students that it's for all, that we need to be inclusive. So in this project, we were really focused on helping students recognize the assets that they bring, the wealth of knowledge that they have from their culture, and those strengths and how that can contribute to STEM. We're also interested in looking at how we can build their academic self-efficacy, their belief that they can be successful in science and careers in STEM. And then also looking at growing a growth mindset, feeling that you have the sense of control over your own ability to succeed versus feeling like, oh, it's just luck, right? Or that if I'm going to win the lottery somehow, but really instead of those external sources, really believing that your internal control will make a difference in your ability to be successful. And then I think also a big part of it is in helping students to understand that failure is a part of the process. So realizing that your first attempt in learning may not be successful, and it's going to take a lot of practice and a lot of iterations, but you will see the fruits of the labor later on. So the project that I want to really get to is centered around faculty development and training, around course transformation. This NSF project was conducted on a US-Mexico border university, and what we did was we had faculty receive stipends to do course transformations. And then we looked at the outcome of them going through the faculty development, where they were focused on using student-friendly language, on connecting with students on a cultural level, getting to know students and using culturally relevant examples in class. So some of the mechanisms were looking at different pedagogical practices and then seeing how you could apply it in class, and using affirming language around the culture instead of deficit-based approaches. So this study, it was our first paper out of the project. I cannot go further without recognizing the tremendous team that I had. Dr. Angela Chapman and then Alexis Rosales were the PIs of the grant. I was a co-PI, and really what I was interested in was looking at the academic outcomes. So this is a published paper, and I can link it in the chat in a minute, but it's called Building Capacity, Transforming Education in STEM Through Culturally Relevant Pedagogy and Community Engagement. And the first results of our study show that it was effective. So let me show you exactly what we found here. We were using culturally relevant pedagogy, again, that they learned in that faculty development. And what they were doing was based on Latson Billings' work, leveraging students' linguistic capital as Spanish and English bilinguals. And it helped them learn biology terms, which are very Latin-based. So connecting that Spanish with the Latin-based terminology was so useful, and they realized that they had kind of a leg up in this because they already had that Spanish language as a foundation. But recognizing that as a strength, and then also we had the instructors really connecting with them in ways that met them culturally. So here's an example of elote, which is Spanish corn that we eat locally in our community a lot. And you can talk about the domestication of crops in any way, but if you make it culturally relevant and you talk about the foods that your students are eating or the music that they're listening to when you're talking about neural pathways, you're connecting with them in ways that make it meaningful, and then they're more likely to gain that knowledge, right? So we used culturally relevant pedagogy to teach bilingually. We actually had the same instructors teach some sections bilingually and then some just the standard way of monolingual English. Because it was a bilingual university, we were able to do that. So in the Spanish English sections, the lectures and class discussions happened in mainly Spanish. They did have a textbook in English, and many of their handouts were in English, but they were allowed to communicate in whatever language that they wanted, and they could submit their homework and assignments in Spanish or English. And of course, the instructor was bilingual proficient. And in a nutshell, I don't want to take up too much time. What we found was that if we looked at comparing the English only, the monolingual only sections that the same instructor was teaching, compared to the bilingual sections, and we compared their pre and post-test gains in not grades, but in content knowledge, we saw significant differences in the bilingual sections, meaning that essentially the modality of teaching bilingually was helpful for these students. They had more content knowledge gains. So really what we were looking at was seeing those knowledge gains, but we also had a lot of questions about student experiences and perceptions of learning. And those were also really insightful because they allowed us to see that the students had more motivation in the bilingual classes, in the culturally relevant pedagogy classes, when the instructors were using those approaches. And so we contend that this is really useful knowledge for educators and policymakers alike, that when we're trying to promote success for bilingual undergraduate students, it's important to look at these sociocultural strengths of the students. So in summary, when I look at things, I'm looking at predictors and context and the interactions among them for success. And I'm also really interested in looking at how we can apply this theory that we have around promoting developmental success to enhance academic outcomes in learners, all learners really, but especially for promoting Hispanic student success. And that was what the NSF funded project was able to allow me to detect. And I welcome any of your questions at the end. Thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Bill? Or Mary?
Yeah, Bill, I think it's Bill, you're muted. Bill is going to share.
I am going to unmute myself and then share screen. Thank you. That was really great. Thanks for sharing. I'm just zoned in. That was really interesting. So thank you.
Yes. I wrote a couple questions down for you actually later.
Let me share my screen. Okay, and are my slides visible to everybody?
Yes, they are.
Wonderful. Okay, Mary, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to also share what we've been working on with the Mathematics Persistence Through Inquiry and Equity project on which Bill and I are PIs. And we are in the 4th year of our project. I can't believe we're already in year 4. It feels like we just got the grant from the NSF just yesterday. Next slide. So this project is a partnership between a 4-year institution, SDSU, and a local 2-year community college. And so we've got our project team members here displayed who work one of the other institution in various capacities in engaging with this work. And this collaboration came about because California passed Assembly Bill 705, which I'll describe on the next slide. This was attending to, yeah, go ahead on the next slide. Thanks, Bill. And this was in response to what was happening in developmental mathematics courses. We'd see a lot of students enrolling in these courses and not as many passing or being successful beyond those courses. And so this Assembly Bill was passed to get students in transfer level mathematics during their first year at their institution. And so the courses that we are going to discuss in this particular slide are tied to what we're calling Gateway Mathematics, College Algebra, Pre-Calculus, and Trigonometry, because with the passage of AB 705, with students being placed in transfer level mathematics, this meant that they were being placed in college algebra, pre-calculus, and trigonometry courses much sooner than before. And there was going to be less enrollment happening in courses that preceded these courses, and which is often called as developmental mathematics. Next slide. And so the context of the 2-year college is a Southern California Hispanic serving institution. SDSU is also an HSI. The 2-year school is traditionally enrolled 20,000 students each term, with 85% coming from minoritized communities and 68% being Latinx. And Gateway Mathematics courses, generally speaking, has had low pass rates. You can see here that prior to the Assembly Bill, students who started in college algebra, less than 12% of them actually were able to successfully make it through Calculus 2. So that graph is a bit disheartening when you see these numbers decrease for students who are wanting to pursue a STEM degree. And I'll just, before jumping to the next slide, a quick note. We don't yet have the data of students' persistence all the way through Calculus 2, because as you can see, this takes time, but we should actually have some of that data in the next 6 months or so, I think, right, Bill, post AB 705. Okay, next slide. So with the passage of AB 705, I've kind of already alluded to this. Students, we see a reduction in developmental courses being offered and being enrolled in. So students are going straight into these transfer level mathematics, primarily college algebra being that first start for them. And students at this particular institution have had the option to self-select and enroll into the mathematics course based on advising conversations, but they still can identify the course they want to start in. Next slide. So the goals of our project, in light of this Assembly Bill being passed, is to work collaboratively with our partners at this Southern California 2-year college in response to AB 705. And through that, we're looking at leveraging research-based practices to develop professional development program within their mathematics department, and doing this very collaboratively. And the focus is on college algebra, trigonometry, and pre-calculus, because again, that's where many of these students are starting. The data collection and this the process for the work on the grant has gone in 3 phases. It's design-based research, where we are designing the professional development and also modifying as we go to best meet participants where they are. In order to do that, the first phase of the grant, we spent a year just really understanding the institution, collecting institutional level data. We observed classrooms, we conducted interviews, we did student focus groups, we got to know, we really needed to build a relationship with folks at the institution so that the professional development program could be seen as owned by them as we co-developed it with them, and we could also gain legitimacy and trust within the institution. We then, in year 2 of the project, began implementing professional development, and from the get-go, we had leaders within the department there helping facilitate sessions and helping develop sessions. And then over time, as we have revised the professional development, they have gradually taken over and spread the knowledge of development PD with others, and are leading in the facilitation of PD this semester. And I think I'm going to pass it off to Bill now so he can share some of the data that has come out of the project.
Okay. So I'll start with the phase 1. So if you kind of go back to that the chart here of the study itself. In phase 1, we were collecting and analyzing some institutional data to inform what types of designs and what types of work we would do in the professional development. And to do the phase 1 work involved looking at institutional data. And what I'm displaying here is a graph that may be a little more than you wanted to take in for lunch. But it is showing the pass rates in the various gateway classes here, the college algebra on the first row, trigonometry, and pre-calculus. And the pass rates are broken out by students who are classified as underrepresented minority, so Black, Latinx, and Filipino students, and then non-URM students at the institution. One of the things that you can see in this graph, and this is going sequentially across years, fall 17, fall 18, fall 19, 20, and 21. And perhaps one of the more notable trends is that the enrollment, the total, if you add up all these bars, enrollment in college algebra really spiked in fall 19, and that was when the new policy went into place. And since that policy has gone into place, the enrollment has actually receded a bit from that high. It's higher than it was at the beginning, but lower than it was at its peak. Despite the spike in enrollment, what we also noticed was that the pass rates did not increase. And so there has been a rather interesting phenomenon where the number of students passing this gateway, college algebra, has increased if you simply add up the blue bars here. And that's true by category. But simultaneously, the number of students who are not passing has also increased, and in fact increased more. And so that led to one of our first insights about the institutional data, which was that there was something of a paradox in terms of how different stakeholders in the institution saw these graphs. And for that, we have a quotation to kind of illustrate this. So the Dean of Counseling said, as you know, the throughput for AB 705, the beautiful part is the high numbers. You've got the numbers, that is more people getting through. But then he goes into this question of the issue of how many of them are actually succeeding in subsequent courses. And so he goes on to say the attrition, in my opinion, is horrible, especially for our equity populations. The Black students is a prime example, but for any population, we have admittedly not good data. So this is one example of the institutional data that we collected that helped us understand how to design and focus some of our professional development efforts. And so while our professional development is rooted in mathematics and in the mathematics that the instructors are actually teaching, we also wanted to make sure that professional development was quite responsive to the lived reality on the ground of the instructors, and then responsive to the demands of the institution itself. I don't have a quotation for this, but another interesting part of this is that when we asked the instructors about how the rollout of the policy is going, many of them focused on the much higher failure rates within their individual classes. And so they experienced this reform quite different from how the administrators did. And so the administrators essentially said, this is more or less working and doing what it's supposed to do, while the instructors had almost the exact opposite perspective. And again, that was really important for us to understand as we designed the professional development, because otherwise we would be, you know, singing from one songbook and they would be singing from another, if you will. So we decided to design our professional development in two parts. And again, relevant, although not sort of part of our design, was that the disruptions due to COVID were happening right as we started this professional development effort. And so we initially imagined doing in-person professional development and being on the site frequently and so on. And they were remote for the first 2 years of our project, essentially. And so we had very little opportunity for in-person interaction, but we did instead design the professional development around these two big themes of inquiry and equity, and then delivered most of the professional development up until this year in a online format via Zoom. For the professional development, in part one, we had 6 sessions focused on inquiry. Each session was 2 hours, and we used initially this textbook by Smith and Stein as a lever to start the discussion. It's called 5 Practices for Orchestrating Productive Mathematical Discussions. And the design of the professional development was collaborative and used a number of ways of gathering input from the instructors themselves so that we could understand some of the ways that they were making sense of our effort. And so, for example, we asked them, when we say inquiry in a mathematics classroom, what are some of the ways that you make sense of this word? And this is an artifact from our research where the PD participants made little online stickies and shared them on a common board here. And here we see some of their ideas about how they might foster inquiry and what inquiry means. So just for example, understanding through questioning, and then some of the strategies that they might have here. For example, having everyone write down ideas, not speaking out loud, which is an interesting idea that we didn't think of, not one that I necessarily would endorse, but this is what the instructors thought of as possible ways to begin the inquiry process. Second part of the professional development was focused on equity and fostering equity in the classroom. And so we were really looking at the classroom level rather than looking necessarily at the institutional level, because the instructors themselves can't necessarily change what's happening outside of their classroom, but they can certainly change what's happening inside the classroom. And so the equity focus was centered around a tool from one of our co-PIs called EQUIP, which is an observation tool for tracking patterns in student verbal participation in classrooms. And the idea is to keep track of who is participating and how often. And I think Amy actually made reference to this, that not all participants in a classroom participate equally. And that raises all sorts of questions about whether or not that's an equitable arrangement. And so the EQUIP tool in some ways is not normative in the sense that we want to say students with particular social markers should participate at this rate, but instead is used to provide data back to the instructors about how patterns of participation are breaking down based on the social markers that the instructors want to investigate. Additionally, this tool attends to the types of classroom discourse, so feeding back into the inquiry focus. What types of questions do instructors ask? How do they ask people to respond? How do they wait? And what is the student's talk length, and so on? Again, I just want to share a really interesting connection that came out in this work. Was many of our instructors are bilingual, but they were actually under the impression that they could not speak Spanish in their classrooms. It was not clear where they had gotten that idea from. But it was fascinating to see then that could have been another, for example, feature of the discourse that we could track, was the language of interaction and so on. So that was a little sidebar, but an interesting part of the equip tool is that you get to actually choose which dimensions to track and how to track those dimensions, and then generate reports to reflect on those. So again, in the equity PD, we did a number of workshops and discussions with the instructors around what they thought equity was and how it manifests in the classroom. These are some of the ways that the instructors made sense of the concept of equity at the end of the professional development. And in general, this happened over 4 sessions. And the way that it actually worked was many cycles of setting an intention, collecting data, getting a debrief from the people who coded the data, and then engaging in another cycle of reflection. Each of the instructors created a demographic survey that they gave to their students, and several of the instructors pointed to that as actually being perhaps the most informative thing. They learned more about their students by asking, who are you and where do you come from? They created a portfolio of their work, and then we have a collection of video clips now based on those interactions. And in the end, this work is resulting in a number of outputs. I think as we get farther along in the process, we've been working really hard on the design and development phase, and now we're in the more studying and dissemination phase. But some of the work that we're working on is instructors and administrators' perspectives on AB 705, which is what I just shared at the beginning of this. We have another piece of work about the students' experiences with placement, where students are diving into how they understand how to take which class and why. It's rather fascinating as an advisor when I listen to students and say, oh my goodness, as many students as there are opinions about how you're supposed to find out where to go, despite what we think is so clear on some website. We have tracking the development of the instructors' conceptions of equity through participating in the PD, unpacking some of the students' ideas about smartness. One of our PhD students, Gabby Hernandez, is really interested in how students define what it means to be good in mathematics, and relates to this concept of growth mindset or other ways of redefining smartness. We're tracking the 2-year college's instructors' teaching practices, trying to understand how they understand the teaching of mathematics. And last, as this goes on and our partners at the community college are taking over the professional development, tracking how it is sustainable or not, or what's happening as it becomes, how it's transformed as they take it over. I think we've spoken a lot, so I'll end there and say thank you to everyone. And we, of course, look forward to questions, and we ourselves are looking forward to seeing the results of this work as it comes to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your excellent presentations.
Round of applause for our speakers today. Thank you so much. It was an excellent webinar. It was very enjoyable, and you're all doing such fascinating work. So
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's really fun. We're excited to learn about Amy's project.
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending as well.